To properly understand the origins of the Eithan Harel Foundation, one must go back to the formative years of its founder, Eithan Harel, a central figure both for his scientific legacy and for the controversies that would later define his work. Born into a family of immense wealth, much of it derived from vast mining operations on the island of Cyprus, Harel had access from an early age to an elite education. His admission to Yale University was not merely a byproduct of social privilege, but also the result of an exceptional intellect that soon set him apart from his peers. During his time at Yale, he quickly drew the attention of several professors who, on more than one occasion, expressed astonishment at the speed and depth with which he grasped advanced concepts in theoretical physics and pure mathematics. What most students approach through long and winding paths seemed to come to Harel with an almost effortless clarity. What made him a singular presence in the academic world, however, was the way he merged that rigorous, logical mindset with a deep and genuinely committed interest in esoteric and theological subjects. Harel made no attempt to hide his fascination with the Kabbalah, nor his habitual readings of the Torah, which he supplemented with lesser-known Hebrew manuscripts. This fusion of disciplines led him to a series of mathematical conjectures whose foundations were rooted more in symbolic interpretation than in formal axioms. And yet, it was precisely in that borderland between the metaphysical and the empirical that he uncovered a key insight, one that caught the attention of a small but influential circle of American theoretical physicists, many of whom were connected to classified defense and astronomical observation projects. According to information leaked decades later, this group had been investigating a series of cosmic anomalies for years, all kept under strict confidentiality. When Harel presented his mathematical model, rooted in interpretations of the Torah, he managed, within weeks, to solve a series of equations that had baffled even the group's most seasoned members. It wasn't just a case of individual brilliance, it was the convergence of seemingly unrelated elements, Kabbalistic patterns, sacred geometries, and fluctuations in Earth's magnetic fields. His theory suggested that certain disturbances in the planet's magnetic field could directly affect the permeability of matter to what, in unofficial terms, was described as entities outside the known physical framework. This proposal took on a new sense of urgency at the time, as Harel's own calculations pointed to an imminent opening, or rupture between planes. Action, therefore, had to be immediate. It was following this critical discovery that Eithan Harel chose to devote his entire personal fortune, along with his time and intellectual resources, to the creation of the foundation that would bear his name. Fully aware of the magnitude of what he had uncovered, and of the risks tied to its exposure, he recognized that traditional scientific institutions were not equipped to handle this kind of knowledge. He gathered a small, highly qualified team of academics and experts, some from Yale University and others from European institutions, particularly those linked to astronomical observatories, particle physics departments, and circles focused on gravitational anomalies. Together, they began to develop a containment strategy which, due to its extraordinary nature, was carried out under absolute secrecy. To this day, the specific details of what they were trying to prevent remain unknown, even to many of those who participated in partial phases of the project. The existing leaks barely scratch the surface of an event that, according to some documents, could have fundamentally altered the fabric of reality as we know it. The core of the plan revolved around the development of a substance internally referred to as compound Z21 violet. This was a highly complex synthetic agent whose creation took nearly a decade and required the enrichment of rare isotopes of praseodymium, an element uncommon on Earth and extremely difficult to manipulate. The process went beyond chemistry, involving atomic resonance techniques and extreme pressure and temperature conditions that could only be reproduced in highly specialized laboratories under government protection. The need for such a level of sophistication lay in the compound's properties. Once in contact with specific layers of the Earth's mantle, Z21 violet would generate a localized and sustained distortion of the planet's magnetic field. Far from being a mere scientific curiosity, this anomaly served a specific purpose: blocking events of unknown nature, possibly related to flows of energy or matter originating from outside the conventional physical system. By the 1970s, with the first stable version of the compound successfully developed, the Foundation moved forward with a full-scale operational intervention. Mozambique was chosen as the site, a country then mired in political and social unrest, which made it easier to establish a cover for the operation. A public controversy was orchestrated around the alleged construction of offshore oil wells, whose supposed environmental impact provoked local outrage while diverting attention from the true objective. This cover story enabled the transport of heavy equipment and technical personnel without raising suspicions within the international community. While public discourse focused on the so-called coastal drilling, the actual operation was unfolding inland. There, under the direct supervision of Eithan Harel Foundation personnel and with logistical support from Israeli military units, a selective occupation of strategic territories was carried out. In these areas, large-scale excavation began using machinery designed to reach depths of at least 30 kilometers, a staggering technical challenge that required collaboration across multiple disciplines. The ultimate goal was to deposit, in a controlled and continuous manner, approximately 1,500 cubic kilometers of compound Z21 violet at specific points within the mantle. The operation spanned 2 years, executed under strict security and confidentiality protocols. By 1977, the complete dispersal of the compound in the designated zones was officially confirmed. The arrival of that force, whose origin, nature, and purpose were never fully understood, remained a latent threat even after the Mozambique intervention. Although the technical records of the Eithan Harel Foundation indicated that the alteration of Earth's magnetic field had been successfully carried out, the true consequences of that modification continued to be a matter of speculation, both within and beyond the scientific circles connected to the project. In concrete terms, there was no absolute certainty about what had been contained, nor how the new electromagnetic pattern was preventing its access or manifestation. However, an important clue regarding the theoretical underpinnings of this effort emerged from a little-documented episode in 1974, when Eithan Harel himself extended a formal invitation to French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan to visit Tel Aviv University. Lacan, renowned for his reinterpretation of Freud and his contributions to language theory, was at the time a controversial but highly influential figure in continental philosophy. What especially caught the academic community's attention was the explicit purpose of the visit. Harel wasn't inviting him as a mere guest lecturer, but as an intellectual interlocutor, capable of offering, from the field of psychoanalysis, a symbolic and even structural reading of what had been carried out in Mozambique. The centerpiece of the visit would be an exploration of one of the most obscure and least publicized concepts in Lacan's work. The Great One, a theoretical instance, Lacan had vaguely linked to a totalizing presence that existed prior to any linguistic structure, lacking all representation and only inferable through its disintegrating effects on the subject. This connection between Lacan's concept and the Harel Foundation's project was seen by some as a bold philosophical gesture, and by others as a risky, even grotesque maneuver. According to internal reports that have since come to light, Harel's intention was for Lacan to deliver a philosophical exposition that could lend ontological legitimacy to the project carried out in Africa, a justification from the realm of symbolic thought for something that otherwise could not be defended or even understood within the framework of traditional science. However, the outcome of the visit was the exact opposite of what Harel had hoped for. During the presentation, held behind closed doors with a small group of Israeli academics and foreign guests, Lacan initially appeared open to discussion, even acknowledging that certain developments in contemporary theoretical physics seemed to brush up against what he had himself theorized as the unsymbolizable real. However, once he grasped the scope and implications of the Z21 Violet project, as well as the conditions under which the Mozambique intervention had been carried out, his demeanor shifted dramatically. According to witnesses, he interrupted the presentation and sternly declared that he refused to take part in what he described as an unethical, technologically reckless, and philosophically perverse endeavor. He accused Harel and his collaborators of weaponizing philosophical concepts to justify actions that, in his view, violated the very notion of humanity. In an uncharacteristic move, Lacan left the conference without taking questions or agreeing to any further meetings. Those who have attempted to reconstruct the story behind the Eithan Harel Foundation's original project have inevitably had to rely on indirect, fragmentary sources, often wrapped in deliberately ambiguous narratives. Much of what is currently theorized draws parallels with the stories surrounding the fictional SCP Foundation, an online collaborative project that documents anomalous phenomena through a pseudo-academic structure. Although its creators openly declare it to be entirely fictional, several analysts have pointed out striking similarities between some of its more cryptic files, particularly those relating to the entity known as SCP-001 and the limited information that has leaked regarding the Harel Foundation's activities. This overlap has led many to speculate that the SCP Foundation, or at least its earliest documents, may have been inspired by real information, encoded in narrative form to avoid censorship or unwanted attention from official agencies. In that light, a speculative line of thought has emerged in recent years linking the appearance of the interstellar object Oumuamua, first detected in 2017, to the cosmic entity Eithan Harel may have attempted to contain through his intervention in the Earth's mantle. The object's unusual shape, non-gravitational acceleration, and unorthodox trajectory remain topics of debate in the scientific community. Some theorists interpret it as a partial physical manifestation, or even a scout, linked to the presence Harel sought to block. What's particularly striking is that this hypothesis coincides in terms of timing with a warning noted in unverified Foundation documents, that the effects of compound S21 violet, along with the distortion of the Earth's magnetic field, would begin to fail sometime during the early decades of the 21st century. Adding to all of this is the sparsely documented but persistent testimony of former collaborators and technicians who claim to have worked with the Eithan Harel Foundation during the 1970s and 80s. These sources, whose anonymity has been rigorously protected, agree on one crucial point. The Foundation's origins were not rooted in geopolitical strategy or conventional scientific goals, but in the deeply personal conviction of its founder. Eithan Harel did not view the project merely as a technical necessity, but as a moral obligation, an answer to something he claimed to have understood firsthand during his years at Yale. This intimate dimension of the project, more akin to a revelation than an empirical discovery, was guarded with exceptional secrecy. In fact, it is said that Eithan Harel's original manuscripts, those in which he meticulously laid out the formulas, calculations, and philosophical principles that formed the basis of the foundational security material in Israel. According to unconfirmed reports, these documents are stored in one of the country's most heavily secured nuclear facilities under an extreme preservation protocol that includes a self-destruction system triggered by unauthorized access. Though such measures may seem excessive, they stem from an institutional belief that the mere act of reading those texts could unleash irreversible consequences, comparable, according to some accounts, to the very event Harel is believed to have discovered during his time at Yale. In the vast and intricate universe of anomalies secured by the SCP Foundation, it is not uncommon for real-world events to become obscured beneath layers of fictional narratives. These accounts, while crafted with meticulous detail and depth, often conceal certain factual elements whose presence is lost among hundreds of classified entries, redacted reports, and entities of uncertain origin. Within this framework, one of the oldest and most puzzling cases is known as SCP-354, informally referred to as the Blood Pond. What may initially appear to be just another entry in the long list of unexplained phenomena is, in truth, the outer shell of an incident whose implications have been deliberately concealed. SCP-354 is described as a dark red liquid mass with a visual appearance and texture strikingly similar to human blood. It is located in a remote area of northern Canada. However, despite its appearance, the substance contains no identifiable biological components. Its depth has never been determined, as it appears to be bottomless, and it exhibits highly unusual physical properties. Its density increases the deeper one goes, rendering any attempt at conventional exploration extremely difficult. Current investigations suggest that the liquid mass may not be a body of water in the traditional sense, but rather a portal or threshold to a reality or dimension distinct from our own. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this phenomenon is the spontaneous and periodic emergence of entities from within the pond. These life forms appear with no consistent timing and, in most instances, display hostility toward any human presence. Their biology and cognitive capacities vary widely, ranging from large, animal-like creatures to humanoid entities of unknown nature. Some have demonstrated superhuman physical abilities, while others have behaved purely on instinct, yet remain equally dangerous. This inconsistency has made it impossible to establish a single, unified containment protocol. Due to the impossibility of relocating the object or altering its location, the SCP Foundation opted to construct a permanent facility around the phenomenon, designated as Site 354. This base is equipped with a comprehensive security system, including physical barriers, permanently stationed armed personnel, motion sensors, and active surveillance cameras. While a significant portion of the effort is directed toward scientific research on the pond, operational priority is focused on the active containment of any emerging threats. Nevertheless, despite the measures in place, several incidents have shown that these entities are capable of inflicting considerable damage to both the facility and its personnel. This has led to the object being classified as Keter level, a designation reserved for anomalies that pose a persistent and severe threat to humanity. The behavior of the pond has led to the hypothesis that SCP-354 may not be linked to a single dimension or parallel universe, but rather to multiple ones. The morphological and behavioral diversity of the entities that emerge supports the theory that each may originate from entirely different environments, suggesting the presence of an interdimensional connection system that remains poorly understood. As a result, the Foundation maintains specialized tactical teams on constant alert, along with an immediate response protocol for any anomalous activity detected on the pond's surface. However, this is where one must begin to look beyond the fictional records. In truth, the case of SCP-354 has direct ties to a far less publicized incident, one that has been documented in fragmented form across various unrelated sources, the so-called Siberian Pool. This formation, reported in a remote region of Siberia, shared similar traits in terms of coloration, density, and anomalous manifestations. It was through the study of this original body of liquid that the decision was made to relocate a small sample of the substance to a more controlled environment, selecting an uninhabited sector in northern Canada for the operation. The transfer took place under the scope of an experimental project aimed at studying the compound's effects under controlled environmental conditions. When introduced to stagnant water pools deep in the forest, the material gave rise to a functional replica of the original phenomenon. In Canada's Northwest Territories, particularly in areas near the border with the province of Alberta, several locations were flagged as possible sites of this massive project. Based on the available information, it is confirmed that during the 1990s, an ambitious infrastructure initiative was undertaken to contain and study these anomalous ponds. To this end, a series of large-scale structures were constructed, airtight domes designed to completely encapsulate the liquid formations, preventing any interaction with the natural environment or with operational personnel unless strict safety measures were in place. The construction of these domes was not without significant complications. One of the main challenges was the physical isolation and containment of the ponds, which required complex engineering work carried out directly over bodies of water with unstable behavior. Heavy machinery was deployed to install pilings, floating platforms, and underwater barriers. However, in multiple instances, the equipment abruptly vanished into the depths, leaving behind no traceable evidence. In other cases, machinery sustained extensive damage upon contact with the fluid, which displayed not only corrosive properties but also signs of biological activity. Unlike the Siberian Pool, the origin of the extracted material These secondary ponds also exhibited cellular modification effects in living organisms, drastically raising the operational risk level. It was also observed that in certain areas the liquid displayed variable viscosity, at times resembling industrial adhesives. This inconsistency in the fluid's texture and behavior made it impossible to establish a standardized incident response protocol and posed serious challenges for the contractors hired to develop the facilities. The extreme environmental conditions of northern Canada, combined with the need to operate under strict confidentiality protocols, further compounded the project's difficulties. During the years it took to construct the domes, approximately 20 deaths were recorded, the causes of which were never fully clarified. Even the classified reports circulated among the involved companies omitted key details or included vaguely technical descriptions that made it impossible to accurately reconstruct what had occurred. In many instances, workers were reported missing following nighttime incidents or partial structural collapses. In others, their bodies were recovered in conditions that could not be explained by any known environmental factors. Finally, in the year 1999, after a decade of construction and numerous changes to the original plans, the ponds were structurally sealed off within the airtight domes, pending the first round of testing. These experiments did not begin until after 2005, when the Foundation authorized research operations. One of the most significant experiments conducted inside the sealed domes involved the direct exposure of marine fauna to the anomalous ponds. These tests, carried out over the course of several years, included both the controlled introduction of adult specimens, such as octopuses, squids, and mid-sized cetaceans, and the rearing of individuals from early developmental stages within the environment influenced by the reddish fluid. The primary goal of these studies was to observe the long-term effects of the substance on complex organisms and to evaluate potential patterns of mutation, physiological resistance, and environmental adaptation. The lead researcher overseeing the project was Dr. Daniel Yafif, a renowned specialist in marine mutation processes. What began as a study into the biological implications of exposing non-native species to the fluid gradually gained attention as increasingly unusual results were documented. According to reports from the time, the animals placed in this environment not only survived but developed remarkable physical resilience, showing significant increases in muscle mass, regenerative capacity, and tolerance to extreme conditions. These changes did not occur uniformly but varied depending on the duration of exposure and the specific conditions within each dome, suggesting a complex interaction between the organism and the anomalous substance. The most compelling case involved several octopus specimens whose body structures began to exhibit non-standard symmetry, the growth of additional tissues, and behaviors indicative of rudimentary tactical coordination. At the same time, some small whales developed internal skeletal modifications, accompanied by dark subcutaneous pigmentation and a marked increase in skin density. These changes, impossible to replicate under traditional laboratory conditions, led to preliminary conclusions about the fluid's mutagenic potential, capable of inducing both structural and behavioral mutations. However, rather than becoming a controlled success, the experiment spiraled into one of the most critical events in the facility's history. In 2009, after years of observation, a series of incidents were reported involving the infiltration of mutated organisms into the internal systems of the domes. Various logs indicated that some of the altered species had managed to breach sections of the structure, moving through its framework and gaining access to technical and support zones. At the same time, anomalies were detected in the foundations of the installations, where biological remnants were discovered that did not match any of the species initially introduced, suggesting either reproduction or accelerated evolution within the fluid's environment. The situation quickly escalated when signs of structural failure were detected, caused by internal corrosion from the same reddish liquid, which appeared to have seeped into the construction materials. Faced with the risk of mutated organisms escaping the containment perimeter, the Foundation made the decision to permanently shut down the facility. The domes were sealed using emergency protocols, and a system of remote surveillance was established, including underground activity sensors and rapid response teams stationed nearby. Since then, the domes have remained sealed and designated as restricted access zones under constant monitoring for any signs of anomalous activity. All research regarding the fluid's mutagenic effects was archived, and the Foundation has maintained a strict policy of silence regarding the results, limiting all documentation to high-clearance internal circles. From the now well-known Eithan Harel Foundation, whose existence and operations have been the subject of previous features on this channel, new information has emerged linking its specialists to unusual events during the 1990s. While much of this material has circulated for years on the internet through forums, leaked documents, and content often dismissed as fiction, some of these accounts contain elements that may reflect partially factual events. Specifically, there is mention of a series of phenomena later associated, at least in internet culture, with the so-called SCP entities. Although that archive is officially regarded as a collaborative work of fiction, certain temporal, geographic, and descriptive coincidences have led some researchers to dig deeper into its possible connections with real-life incidents. Between 1995 and 1996, in the remote region of Karajat, located in one of the most uninhabited areas of Greenland, European and Canadian workers, including engineers, geology technicians, and mining personnel, reported the emergence of underground pulses with no identifiable seismic source. These signals were first picked up by seismographic equipment used to monitor the stability of the mining sites, which were still in an exploratory phase, as operations had only recently begun in the late 1980s. The irregularities in the readings intensified over time, prompting more detailed inspections that included thermal scans of the subsoil. It was through this technology that the first anomalous images were captured, thermally active shapes of unusual proportions, appearing to correspond to a partially fossilized organic structure, lying in what seemed to be a dormant or inactive state. This discovery triggered an immediate alert that bypassed the usual channels of mining operations. Within weeks, thanks to a special permit granted directly by the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland's administrative authority, all mining activity in the affected area was officially suspended. The site, which had seen no more than 6 years of preliminary exploitation, was handed over to personnel affiliated with the Eithan Harel Foundation, who had prior experience dealing with phenomena not classified within the conventional parameters of geological or biological science. Since 1987, the State of Israel had maintained a facility near the Umanak Fjord, a classified base that was officially presented as an international climate research center. It was at this facility that logistical and technical efforts were concentrated to begin a controlled excavation and extraction process of the specimen. At the onset of the extraction from beneath the Karajat subsoil, the specialists leading the operation began recording behaviors that pointed to a gradual reactivation of the specimen's biological functions. Although the entity had initially been interpreted as being in a fossilized or prolonged dormant state, a series of physiological responses began to emerge as it was removed from its original environment. Among the first signs observed were slight muscular contractions resembling autonomous reflexes and an extremely faint respiratory pattern, barely detectable even with high-sensitivity instruments. Additionally, low-frequency sound emissions were documented, so deep they were almost imperceptible to the human ear without amplification. These signs reinforced the hypothesis that the creature was not entirely inert, but rather exhibiting minimal yet sustained responses to external stimuli. An unexpected event occurred during the transport of the creature to the Foundation's central facility. 3 workers, all with technical backgrounds and no prior history of suggestibility or emotional instability, reported being attacked by the entity at different times. All 3 described the projection of a dark, viscous substance expelled from an opening that, based on its shape and location, was interpreted as a primary or secondary jaw. This substance, whose origin remains undetermined, appeared to have variable density and adhered to both clothing and skin, though it caused no burns or immediate detectable effects. Nevertheless, the incident led to heightened security protocols, and speculation about the creature's adaptive capabilities and responsiveness began to gain traction among the scientific team. These incidents gave rise to the hypothesis that the organism possessed a non-static physical composition, potentially subject to alteration depending on environmental conditions, perceived threat level, or type of interaction with other living beings. This theory was reinforced by observations of increasingly aggressive behavior toward individuals attempting close examination, prompting the establishment of a controlled perimeter throughout the transportation and containment process. Once relocated, the creature was submerged in a large tank, originally filled with water, with the goal of facilitating observation in a controlled setting that would allow the study of its reactions without invasive procedures. Initially, water was considered a neutral element, useful for visual monitoring and for maintaining a degree of physiological stability in the specimen. However, over the following weeks, the Foundation's bioengineers began to notice an alarming pattern. Rather than keeping it in a passive state, the water appeared to aid the organism's physical recovery. The creature's biological tissue showed signs of reinforcement, accelerated cell growth, and, on at least 3 documented occasions, coordinated attempts to escape the tank. These were not merely reflexive movements, but actions that suggested a basic form of intent and a rudimentary understanding of its surroundings. In light of evidence showing continuous regeneration and an unusual resistance to physical containment, an emergency protocol was activated. This protocol included measures designed to immobilize the organism without fully destroying it. Despite the effort, the response only succeeded in keeping it confined within the limits of the tank. It did not reduce its regenerative activity or lessen its potential threat. At that point, the decision was made to replace the water with a solution composed of hydrochloric acid in varying concentrations, along with corrosive compounds engineered to induce a state of constant decomposition in the creature's outer tissue. What was discovered after introducing this new medium proved especially significant. The creature was not only capable of regenerating tissue at speeds unknown to any terrestrial life form, but its regeneration appeared to scale in proportion to the level of inflicted damage. The acidic compounds, however, managed to establish a partial equilibrium in which ongoing tissue breakdown prevented the organism from reaching full functionality. In other words, while its regenerative capacity remained active, it was held in check, allowing for a state of apparent stability in which the creature remained harmless, though not inactive. This chemically induced biological balance, maintained under strict supervision, became the only effective measure preventing the specimen from escaping. Unfortunately, and consistent with other reports linked to the Eithan Harel Foundation, some of the procedures carried out after the creature's containment have raised serious ethical concerns. According to documentation leaked years later, the Foundation allegedly requested the extradition of incarcerated individuals, including those serving long-term sentences and inmates classified as highly dangerous, for the purpose of conducting direct experimentation on the creature. Sources indicate these individuals were transferred under irregular circumstances through confidential agreements and placed under intense surveillance within the underground facility where the organism was housed. During these forced interactions, the creature was observed to undergo frequent and substantial morphological changes. Its size, density, and body structure fluctuated in ways that appeared erratic, yet behavioral logs revealed patterns suggesting a degree of responsiveness to the psychological or emotional profile of each exposed subject. The entity not only altered its form, but also its behavior, seemingly adapting its strategies of attraction or manipulation to suit the individual it encountered. Several of the inmates, prior to their disappearances or deaths, reported that the creature spoke to them, though not in any traditional verbal sense. They described hearing voices inside their minds, messages articulated directly into their consciousness, as if the entity possessed some form of telepathic or hypnotic communication. These reports were accompanied by accounts of intense sensory hallucinations, memories reconstructed with altered details, visions of deceased family members, and visual distortions of the surrounding environment. Taken together, these effects appeared engineered to break the individual's will, compelling them, whether voluntarily or under influence, to approach the creature's core. According to internal reports, the ultimate fate of these subjects was invariably fatal, as they were consumed by the creature in episodes described with extreme violence and slow anatomical decomposition. These practices, never officially acknowledged by the Foundation, further cemented the perception that the entity was not merely a biological anomaly, but a presence with cognitive and strategic components. Its actions were not purely instinctive. There was a clear deliberateness in how it explored, manipulated, and destroyed. To this day, according to sources who continue to speak under strict anonymity, the creature remains contained in a high-security facility, buried deep within the ice in Greenland's subsoil. Surveillance persists, as do efforts to understand its origin, its capabilities, and its possible limitations. Meanwhile, the events of Karajat have faded from the public consciousness, resurfacing only in altered form, transformed into fictional accounts circulating through online forums and digital archives. And so was born one of the most enduring legends of the contemporary internet, the entity known as SCP-682. It's well known among fans of speculative fiction that the SCP Foundation universe operates under a unique internal logic. This fictional organization is devoted to the securing, containment, and protection of anomalous phenomena that defy rational explanation. Within this narrative framework, countless entities and objects are kept under strict surveillance due to the potential danger they pose. What's less commonly discussed, however, is that many of these stories, though clearly shaped by fiction, appear to have roots in real-world incidents and classified reports. While there's no direct one-to-one correlation between real-life phenomena and SCP files, researchers and enthusiasts have noted striking parallels, particularly in accounts involving unidentified entities and manifestations that might represent a genuine threat to humanity. One of the most well-known examples is the figure designated SCP-106, typically portrayed as an elderly humanoid whose overall appearance unmistakably suggests a state of advanced biological decay. This deterioration does not follow any known pathological process and remains constant, albeit with varying morphological details that never detract from its essential, ever-rotting condition. Accompanying this decomposition is a reported ability to leave behind an active form of corrosion, one that can degrade most materials it touches. This description finds a disturbing counterpart in the confidential archives of the Eithan Harel Foundation, an Israeli institution based in Jerusalem. In 1999, this foundation conducted a series of investigations inside restricted access facilities that seemed to echo, with unsettling precision, the characteristics attributed to this entity. According to information recovered from internal sources, the experimental complex operated by the Eithan Harel Foundation is believed to occupy nearly 1/4 of the subterranean area beneath the city of Jerusalem, though no official body has ever confirmed this. It is known that the most dangerous and highly classified containment zones are located toward the eastern sector of the city, coinciding with areas of restricted transit and minimal civilian presence. It was in this context that, during the year 1999, Foundation teams detected an anomaly in the Ramat Eshkol neighborhood in the northern part of Jerusalem. Reports described the sudden appearance of a group of elderly individuals exhibiting highly unusual physical conditions. These individuals were found in a semi-conscious state with extremely limited motor response and no evidence of articulated speech. What immediately caught the attention of field personnel was that their bodies were entirely coated in a dark, viscous substance, initially mistaken for a mixture of crude oil and mud. The pungent odor and dense texture of the material made immediate analysis difficult. At first, the leading theory was that these people had been exposed to an industrial accident or toxic waste spill. However, as the days passed and clinical testing began, that theory was quickly discarded. It became evident that the subjects could not be classified as human by any conventional biological standard. It wasn't until roughly 2 weeks into observation that researchers began to accept that what they were dealing with did not match any known anatomical profile. The vital signs were barely perceptible, and despite repeated attempts at interaction, the subjects displayed no physiological responses consistent with any human health condition, not even pathological ones. Meanwhile, chemical analyses of the coating substance yielded no conclusive results. Its composition did not match any known natural element or synthetic compound in existing scientific databases. Faced with the inability to categorize either the entities or the substance, the Eithan Harel Foundation opted to place them under permanent isolation, enforcing continuous monitoring and granting access only under the strictest security protocols. After an intensive study period lasting nearly 5 months, the scientific and technical teams of the Eithan Harel Foundation concluded that the observed entities had to be classified as extremely dangerous. This designation was not made lightly. It followed a series of incidents within the observation chambers, where signs of escalating structural degradation were recorded, alongside repeated failures to establish any predictable behavioral patterns in the humanoids. In response, Foundation engineers were forced to develop, through prolonged trial and error and multiple redesigns, highly complex isolation systems capable of safely containing these beings and minimizing the destructive effects of their presence. Throughout the period of direct observation, one consistent pattern emerged. Any room or enclosure where the humanoids had remained, even briefly, soon showed signs of severe damage. Walls displayed advanced corrosion, electrical systems failed randomly, and an unidentified type of infestation was noted, characterized by the rapid spread of dark organic matter across both metal and plastic surfaces. In certain sectors of the facility, anomalous spikes in temperature were documented, reaching levels high enough to melt reinforced concrete and warp steel structures, despite no identifiable heat source. These findings supported the growing hypothesis that the presence of the entities triggered physical and chemical processes unexplainable within current scientific frameworks. As for their behavior, it was determined that these beings did not exhibit remarkable mobility, though this should not be mistaken for a weakness. They often remained completely still for days on end, even in a standing position, as if enacting some kind of predatory ritual. This state of absolute stillness did not follow any circadian rhythm, nor respond to external stimuli. Despite their apparent lethargy, they demonstrated unusual physical capabilities. They could effortlessly scale vertical surfaces of any material and were observed hanging upside down for indefinite periods, showing no signs of fatigue or biomechanical strain. This behavior was captured through recordings in specialized surveillance chambers, prompting immediate changes to their containment protocols, including the elimination of any structural support points near the ceilings of their cells. In controlled testing scenarios, where living organisms were introduced into the observation chamber to study the humanoids' reactions, the results were consistently alarming. The subjects would come into contact almost immediately with the dark fluid secreted by these entities, a highly corrosive substance that began by destroying the outer layers of skin and rapidly spread to deeper tissue. Within minutes, progressive disintegration of muscle, tendons, and internal organs was observed until only the skeleton remained exposed. This process appeared to have no nutritional or energetic purpose. There was no recorded instance of the humanoids consuming organic material. Instead, the data suggested a non-biological motivation, perhaps behavioral or instinctual, a compulsion to inflict harm for its own sake. What was most disturbing throughout the observation period was the complete absence of any form of conscious communication from these creatures. They did not respond to auditory, visual, or tactile stimuli specifically designed to provoke a cognitive reaction. All attempts to establish contact, including the use of devices intended to translate neuroelectric signals, failed entirely. Experts concluded that these entities were not merely unfamiliar with linguistic or symbolic interaction. Rather, based on all available evidence, they appeared to operate solely on a drive to induce suffering in others without any apparent physiological or mechanical necessity behind it. It was precisely this chilling trait that led the engineers at the Eithan Harel Foundation to make one of the most controversial decisions in the organization's operational history. Realizing that the entities were drawn exclusively to extreme pain and that they responded immediately and aggressively when certain thresholds of suffering were reached, the containment team designed a highly specialized system that would exploit this destructive impulse as a means of control. To that end, a complex network of specialized machinery was developed, not only designed to inflict physical pain far beyond conventional human thresholds, but also to do so in sustained and variable patterns that would keep the entities actively engaged. The operators of these devices were not members of the technical or scientific staff, but rather prisoners serving life sentences, recruited under strictly classified conditions. These individuals were tasked with assisting in the construction, maintenance, and operation of the devices. Their responsibilities included tending to the victims during the process, stabilizing them between cycles of pain, or reviving them in the event of unconsciousness. The logic behind this practice was simple, though its execution was brutal. Generate intense, controlled pockets of suffering to lure the entities into specially engineered trap zones. Once inside, the creatures would become ensnared in multi-layered containment structures built from high-density concrete, lead, and chambers filled with experimental liquids designed to induce latency, disorientation, or sensory disruption. The containment design prevented movement or the buildup of corrosive energy, keeping the subjects locked in a continuous state of neurological instability and motor passivity. These facilities were also equipped with autonomous sensors that monitored activity levels, as well as redundant systems capable of automatically adjusting the intensity of stimuli in response to fluctuations in the entity's behavior. Thanks to this attraction and confinement mechanism, it is still believed that the entities remain under strict isolation, with no signs of escape or activity beyond the limits imposed by the Foundation. However, the documentation available on the subject is sparse, fragmented, and deliberately incomplete. No official records have surfaced that clearly explain the origin of these creatures or why they were found wandering, seemingly without purpose, through residential areas in northern Jerusalem. Despite numerous efforts to trace any background that might shed light on their provenance or intent, the only certainty is that, since the 1999 incident, no similar event has ever been recorded outside of containment. Vostok Station was established by the Soviet Union in 1957, deep in the heart of East Antarctica, one of the most remote and inhospitable regions on Earth. Though founded in the mid-20th century, its existence and the true nature of the operations carried out there remained unknown to the public for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't until 1974 that American teams, during an aerial and geophysical reconnaissance mission, detected what appeared to be a military complex on the Antarctic plateau, built atop what looked like a vast expanse of solid ice. Subsequent ground-penetrating radar studies revealed that beneath that massive frozen plain lay a giant subglacial body of water, which would later be identified as Lake Vostok. Between the late 1950s and the early 1990s, a number of drilling operations were undertaken with the goal of reaching deeper layers of Antarctic ice. However, technical challenges, environmental safety protocols, and limited logistical capacity slowed progress significantly. It wasn't until 1998 that a drilling effort successfully penetrated the densest part of the ice and, for the first time, reached the layers immediately above the lake's liquid environment. Even so, many official records cite the year 2012 as the pivotal moment when the lake was accessed, since that was when testimonies and documents began to surface, alluding to events that had allegedly occurred decades earlier. According to various sources, that information had remained undisclosed until a leak, believed to have come from within, exposed for the first time what had been discovered in the depths of Lake Vostok. To this day, however, the exact timeline of those events remains a matter of debate, with no clear consensus among researchers or the authorities involved. One name that gained particular prominence in the wake of that leak was that of Dr. Anton Padalka, a marine biologist specializing in extremophilic organisms, who was reportedly part of one of the first scientific missions sent to explore the lake's biological content during the 1990s. The account attributed to Padalka, made public shortly before his death under unclear circumstances, offered a detailed narrative of some of the incidents that had taken place during the expedition. Among the most striking elements of his testimony was the emergence of what would later be referred to as Organism 46B, and an unclassified specimen said to have been spotted just days after the final layer of ice separating the research team from the subglacial water had fractured. Padalka reported that shortly after entering the lake, the team began experiencing a series of technical malfunctions, instrument failures, data transmission anomalies, disrupted radio signals, and erratic behavior from several electronic devices. At first, these issues were attributed to environmental interference or mechanical failures caused by the extreme cold. However, as the mission progressed, the idea of a conventional explanation began to lose ground in favor of a more unsettling possibility: an unknown and potentially biological cause. The most tragic event on record occurred when researcher Oleg Makar, a close colleague of Padalka and the team's lead diver, died after coming into direct contact with water extracted from the lake via the drilling system. According to unofficial accounts, Makar had barely brushed the surface of the liquid with his gloved hand when he suffered an immediate reaction that could not be explained with the resources available at the site. Organism 46B has been described as a cephalopod-like creature with a main body measuring between 16 and 33 feet in length and up to 14 fully functional tentacles, according to recorded observations. Its overall morphology resembles that of a squid, although its behavior, physiology, and capabilities place it well outside any known biological classification within conventional science. The creature's habitat is Lake Vostok, a subglacial body of water buried beneath more than 10,000 feet of ice. Completely isolated from the surface world for millions of years, this environment has long been the subject of scientific speculation due to the possibility that it may harbor life forms adapted to extreme conditions. Among the most striking features of Organism 46B is its ability to release a toxin into the surrounding water, capable of paralyzing prey from distances of up to several kilometers. This neurotoxin, whose chemical composition remains unknown, proved alarmingly effective even against advanced protective systems. During the expedition, it became evident that the pressurized and thermally insulated suits, custom designed to withstand the lake's hostile conditions, offered no meaningful protection against the creature's secreted compound. Only small samples of the fluid could be safely contained, and even then, only in vessels made from synthetic diamond alloy and specially treated concrete due to the toxin's high reactivity with conventional materials. Another of its most unsettling abilities is its capacity for morphological change. Multiple incidents were recorded in which severed limbs from the organism continued to move aggressively, independent of the main body, suggesting a level of neuromuscular autonomy that remains unexplained. This trait was also linked to signs of strategic intelligence and deliberately hostile behavior. Far from reacting on instinct alone, the organism appeared to carry out actions with a degree of planning that forced expedition members to reconsider its place within established biological classification systems. In the days following the initial incursion into Lake Vostok's aquatic environment, the research team came under a series of indirect attacks. The primary method of aggression employed by organism 46b involved the gradual release of its toxin into areas where scientists were diving or collecting samples. The result was a sequence of deaths whose clinical causes could not be explained using standard medical tools. Autopsies of Dr. Anton Padalka's colleagues revealed significant alterations to the structure of the cerebral cortex. The brain tissue, normally arranged in convolutions, had lost its characteristic shape, transforming into an unstable organic mass with no recognizable symmetry. More disturbingly, the tissue displayed residual electrical activity and even irregular pulsations at the time of forensic examination. One of the most disturbing episodes occurred several days after the confirmed death of Oleg Makar. Although his passing had been documented, and according to reports, his body never fully recovered, several members of the expedition claimed to have seen him diving in the deeper sections of the lake. At first, this was dismissed as a case of mistaken identity or stress-induced hallucination. However, footage captured by underwater cameras clearly showed a human figure identical to Makar, moving with coordinated, purposeful motion. The only hypothesis put forward is that organism 46b may possess the ability to replicate, at least partially, the physical form of its victims. This capability is thought to result from a genetic information transfer triggered by exposure to the toxin, allowing the creature to mimic previously attacked life forms, possibly using that likeness as a method of deception or defense. While it was initially believed that organism 46b was a lone specimen, later reports indicate that at least 10 organisms with similar morphological traits have been documented, likely belonging to the same biological family. Following the leak of documents attributed to Dr. Padalka, a wave of accusations was quickly directed at the Kremlin, particularly from academic and media circles in the West. The prevailing theory that took hold suggested that the Russian government had deliberately concealed the existence of an extremely dangerous biological entity, one whose capabilities might pose a threat not only to the personnel involved in the expedition. It wasn't long before theories began to circulate alleging institutional negligence, or even the possibility of a failed experiment involving biotechnology or unconventional weaponry. In response to the mounting media pressure, Russian authorities acted swiftly. Through official statements and ministerial briefings, they categorically denied the authenticity of the leaked documents, as well as the existence of organism 46b. These declarations emphasized that such accounts were nothing more than baseless fabrications, fueled by what they described as the typical sensationalism of the Western Internet. From this stance, the accusations were framed as part of a recurring narrative trend, one that portrays former Eastern Bloc nations as opaque, backward, and deliberately hostile, reinforcing a caricatured view of their institutions and attributing to them almost inherently malicious intent.